Okay,
So we're back to some details here, and the differences, the evolving little details. And we already talked about some of the features of this one. But you can also notice that the drive shaft housing on this early one is much smaller than the later ones.
Was that a 27 only?
Yeah, I'd say it's 27
The small
only,
torque tube?
Yeah, yeah,
you suppose they had some breakage?
probably.
Put more horsepower out than they thought it did.
Yeah. So the other interesting thing about these is that the gas tanks are cast aluminum,
Yeah,
and they were cored, and you can't quite see it well, but you can just maybe see a circle.
yeah, I can see
Some
a
of these
very
show a
small one
circle.
right there.
It's not that small.
Oh,
it's like
was it
two,
much bigger?
2 inch, probably a 2
Okay.
inch.
Well,
So
my
that's
mind
how
can see anything.
that's how they supported the core in the mold.
Okay,
So the core had a couple 2 inch.
so they had to be welded in.
No, they're pressed in. So that's
Okay.
you can almost see that the tanks are thicker there. With a flashlight,
Yeah,
you can see.
okay.
But you can see the tank has a section there that's beefed up, and those
So they were
plugs
pressed in plug?
pressed in plug. So one of the things that were found early on that these tanks leaked. Not only didn't they weep a little where those were pressed in, but being a sand cast tank, they weeped here and there. And the fix was treating them with a material called water glass. Anybody hear of water glass? If you look on the internet, it's some water soluble stuff that you pour in, and it puts a coating on the inside, and it's quite an interesting technique. And it's a material that can be bought. I forgot the chemical name for water glass, but there is a chemical name, and you could actually still get it today.
That was the historic fix for those.
Yeah,
Yeah,
from the
wow.
factory.
Wow.
The other piece, more obvious than anything, is this early one has the name Hartford cast right in the back of the tank.
Okay.
And then soon afterwards, I think the Hartford name cast in the tank still appeared in early 28. I know of one other one that's now moved off to New York State that may have, it's early 28, that had the name cast in. And then afterwards they went to the decal. And the thesis actually shows the decal. The thesis shows the motor, the Hartford, at MIT, with the decal on the back, and a side decal, starting, oiling instructions, the whole thing.
Okay.
Now there were a couple of different decals.
I think there were. 'Cause
Right, there was
this
a-
one has that little thing underneath
Right.
that probably says Graham Pryor Machine Company, Hartford, Connecticut. And then the other
Worcester
one
Twin.
doesn't have that.
And then additionally on the ends, there was a style for the ends. This style has instructions.
Right.
But then on the other ones, there was just the letter H.
Right. Yeah, and I have, that appeared in the brochures.
In fact, is that true? I mean, a lot of times drawings
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they do for advertising weren't the real.
There's no evidence of this appearing anywhere from original. This one also shows the original Graham Pryor barrel valve carburetor with the fuel line going
Okay.
across and down into it.
Okay.
And none of those have survived, and
Okay.
they looked like they all were changed.
Maybe they never did use it. I mean, again, like, Mercury's 4-cylinder motor. I mean, you see the original advertising for it, and it was
So this
totally
one,
different.
This
when
one
they came
shows
out with it.
the real skinny drive shaft housing.
Okay.
It also shows the lower unit without a cone. It's got just
Okay.
an opening there
All right.
for the water pump.
No snorkel.
Right. So
And looks like an Eisman mag.
yeah, for sure.
Huh.
So there were a whole evolution. Being a small company, they must have just said, well, we can make this better, and they would do a little something. And now we can also, I think we've covered some of the important details. There's not much difference between this late 28 and this late 29. I mean, there's a few differences. The exhaust is a little bit different, and you know the tank has been finally beefed up.
But they're still using the water glass treatment even in
Oh yeah,
29.
yeah, yeah. For all
So
we know, Indian.
So this was a water-based treatment,
Yes, water glass. Yeah.
and how long did it last? I mean, was it in response to the
Still-
leaking,
It's
or
still
did
good.
Yeah.
Those tanks don't leak.
Okay.
No,
You what?
they don't leak.
They don't leak.
No.
Okay. So it was something they experienced very early on and processed all of them, all the tanks like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So some of the details, we already talked about some of this. Advertising was pretty extensive. So this is late December of 1927, and so we've got page 93. There's a ad for one showing the earliest. This is still 1927. And there's a testimonial that talks about, how great it is and all. So these guys advertised in motorboating more than even like Lockwood. They really, almost every month, there was an ad for these.
Is it possible that the editorial offices were fairly close by, and they had a salesman appear frequently?
Well, that could be. That could be. So here it is, featured in a November 1927, huh?
Yeah.
Being featured as the latest new upward motor announced. Graham Pryor. Yep.
Is that a running blurb or somebody who actually ran the engine? Some of them, they actually ran them. You don't know.
Well, this one I showed you here had that testimonial of somebody running the thing from Hartford to Saybrook down the Connecticut River and back. So,
Okay.
Yeah. So some of the other details, the internal parts. This would be a Hartford Indian crankshaft, which would be the two. There'd be no difference between the two of them. This one's heavily damaged. It's been fixed and then damaged again, but it just shows how beefy, how rugged the crankshaft is for these. Quite large compared to other makers. I think the Lockwood Chief has one this big, but most of the Alto Speedster has a big crankshaft like this, and the other makers had smaller ones. Connecting rods were very, very robust. This actually is connecting rods that I made for these, but they're copies of the original in bronze. There were no roller bearings in the power head at all. Just one ball bearing in the lower unit.
Okay.
Not much of a stroke there, in short rods.
Very, very, very short stroke engine. So this is a 29 Hartford piston here that shows the 1/8 wide rings.
Okay.
But Indian,
Hold that up to the Indian one. Yeah.
yeah. So Indian decided, well,
Hold them up so I can look at them.
heck, we got to go back to the original 3/16 wide
Okay.
rings.
Got you. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Indian used really nice. They had rings that were grooved like that. I think they really hoped that by having an oil space, a place for oil, they'd probably hold better compression. I don't think it worked, but other pistons. Over the years, I've made pistons for these because they tend to be trouble. And so anyway, that's some of my manufacturer, Hartford Indian pistons. So we already talked about the business of the cylinder differences, the ring width and all that. But one of the things I wanted to also talk about a little bit is the Indian outboard motor. And I wanted to actually say this in the beginning of the talk, is that certainly there's a lot of sensitivity about Native Americans these days. And I just wanted to add in my talk here about using the name Indian and with apology, because it's a name that the company had picked, that, that they thought that it would honor the Native Americans, and in fact it probably didn't. And certainly from me, I would like to say to the Native Americans that I am very sympathetic to the cause, and I view it as the American Holocaust as to what happened to the American Indians.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think my camera ran out of
Yeah,
juice.
right. You can use that or not, but
Well, you can leave it up to Mr. Trunks.
Right.
He's a more forward-thinking, younger guy than me and you.
I felt it's important to recognize that.
Speak your piece.
I don't think that.
And the other let me tell you something else now too about this. I worked for really good guys. So these Gray and Pryor guys, and you could record this if you want to.
We're gonna wait, listen first.
Robert Gray and George Pryor were part of a great group of Americans, like Henry Ford, like Ole Evinrude, and a lot of the other people that we've learned from, that happened, in around 1900. My point is, these guys really what made America great.
The next.
What's that again? Now you said you think that
Just talking about some differences.
This is a bigger outlet for starting to make it start easier versus the little tiny holes in that one.
The smaller one, the whole
And-
plate is a different diameter in
And
28
as a
versus
result, they
29.
had a tie rod going through that one. They had room for it, but on this one they didn't. So
they
they had
use
to
a plate.
put a plate on the outside to hold the two halves together. I see, to hold it rigid.
So this just
Okay.
kind of seems like classic
Right.
retrofitting to address
Yeah.
an issue.
Well, an
without
issue
changing-
starting is
Yeah.
So I ran this engine at Tomahawk one year, and BJ looked at it and said, "Oh, I saw a Hartford that had this plate, but it had their name in it, cast in." So they could have been the perfect opportunity to.
Is this the guy who guarantees his engines don't run?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. But he's also very knowledgeable about. He's seen a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure
And
he
this
has.
Hartford that he talked about seeing, I never saw a picture of it. I never saw it. I never heard of it. So might be a few Hartfords floating around that we don't know the serial numbers of or something. There was also another Hartford.
See that engine right there?
Yeah.
When they advertised that engine, it had a flat stainless steel wraparound, all right, with a green decal that said Mercury Mark 50.
Wow.
Okay, so
never made that.
no,
Right.
so that was in their advertising, and I went down to a gentleman who is now deceased, and he had one. And I said, "Where did this come from?" He said, "Oh, this. You could see the outline of the decal on this cowling." And after he was gone, I asked a friend of his that worked with him very closely. He said, "Oh yeah, he made those up and sold them to a couple of people like it was the real thing." So I think there's a fair amount of that kind of stuff that goes on in this business as well. I mean, how easy would it be to cast one of those with
Real easy.
the name Hartford in it?
Somebody would have to do the artwork.
How difficult would that even be with a gouge?
Real
Make a
hard.
wooden-
To make it look good.
Well, just to be there at all is like,
Yeah.
I think there's a fair amount of hokey pokey that goes on in this business. You do know that there's somebody also making faceplates for KG7s and KG7Hs.
Yeah.
I have one with 000 from
Really?
the guy who was making them. Yeah. So who knows?
Yeah, I know. There's also another Hartford, and it's number 26. Then he died. And then there was this sale at his house, and unfortunately I couldn't go to that sale. And that Hartford went to somebody in Maine, disappeared someplace. And then another Hartford showed up at one of Linwood Dahl's meets, a really long time ago. And the guy brought it to the meet to sell. People, of course, climbed all over it, but for some reason, the sale wasn't made, probably because the guy wanted way too much for it. So there's either one or two of these things floating around somewhere in Maine, and they just disappear, and I don't know how or why, but they disappear.
Well, you got to remember, you know, I get calls all the time that people drop stuff off here. They don't know what it is. It's just an old piece of junk.
Yeah.
Frosty says, this is the end of the show.
That's all.
Goodbye.